Over to you, Mr. Kelikume.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you webinar sessions that LDS has put forward this period of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our topic today is post-COVID-19 agribusiness opportunities and challenges. Because it's a webinar session, I'm going to do it in such a way that it will be interactive and I'll be able to take so many questions. And knowing fully well that we have a very large audience, I am going to be as simple as possible. So welcome audience again for taking out time to join us in this ethical topic. So I'm going to be looking at, I'll take the introduction, preamble, I'll look at the current COVID-19 updates. I'll also look at the impact point of the COVID-19 update on the Nigerian economy. We'll also examine why Nigeria must focus on the agricultural sector and especially on the agribusiness sector. I'll also look at the current evolving challenges in the agricultural sector. So my session has been divided into two parts. I'll take the first part and I'll leave the audience to present or type in some of their questions and I'll take those questions. Whilst the second part, I will also expect us to throw in our questions because I know a lot of us have questions to ask. We all know that the world economy is grappling with a new kind of challenge since the novel coronavirus was announced in December from China. So the impact of the virus is currently felt in over 210 countries around the world and has thrown the world economy into a dual effect of health and economic crisis. The countries affected, in a bid to slow down the spread of the coronavirus, implemented drastic measures, and some of these measures in the economics parlance, they call them protectionist policies. They've come up with all kinds of protectionist policies to close their borders in order to stop the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. So the result of all of these measures taken by the different countries has been a disruption of logistics, hospitality, and most of the industries, especially those that will have to deal with the kind of food that we produce from the agricultural sector. The direct effect is a projection by the monetary. If you look at the direct effect, according to the IMF, the world economy is going to slump by 3% of what is happening globally. So the aim of this session is to open up edges before operators in the agri-value chain. So given the nature of the audience, I will move very slowly because there are certain concepts that we need to actually define. So most times we use the term agriculture and agribusiness interchangeably. So I will go slowly by defining what we mean by agriculture, agribusiness, and some of the core concepts that we use in the class. Agriculture and agricultural sector are quite different. Agriculture simply means the practice of farming, especially those of us that are in the upstream value chain. Agriculture means going directly into cultivation. And when we say cultivation, we're actually dealing with four sectors. Agricultural sector is subdivided into four sectors. We have crop production, we have animal husbandry, we have forestry, and we have fishery. So agribusiness, so this involves the business of managing agricultural produce from farm to fork. It relates to the interlinkages between direct farming and the process in which these products the produced product will get to the final consumer. So when we talk in terms of agribusiness, we are looking at logistics, we are looking at distribution, we are looking at packaging, we are looking at sales, we are looking at storage facilities, we are looking at seed. We are also looking at land management. We are looking at accounting practice in the business. So agribusiness is broader. The concept is broader than agriculture. Agricultural sector, like I said earlier, is subdivided into crop production, livestock, fishery, and forestry. So if you find most players, when you hear that they're going into farming, they're actually playing in the crop production segment of the agricultural sector. Agribusiness sector is subdivided into 4 major sectors. We have the pre-upstream, we have the upstream, we have the midstream, and we have the downstream sector. So one of the things that I share in class is that the closer you are to the upstream value chain, the likelihood that you are going to enter into a lot of issues and a lot of challenges. Time will not permit me to expound on what I just said. So I bring GDP. So this is the annual size or value of agricultural sector output measured actually annually. When we measure agri output, if you hear a farmer or a practicing farmer say, I have XYZ land, the first question you ask is, what is the yield per hectare? So what most people don't know is that we do not measure production or productivity in the farming sector as against yield per land. We measure it in regards to yield per hectare, not yield per plot of land. The current updates on the COVID-19 pandemic. As at 22nd April 2020, the world has recorded 2.6 million plus cases, with total deaths of 184,000 plus cases. The virus is now in 210 countries. And in 52 countries in Africa, we have passed the denial phase. As at February, Nigerians were still denying that this thing does not affect the black man. Africa has recorded 25,000 plus cases with over 2,000 deaths. Nigeria currently is moving towards 1,000 cases. Currently, we have 981 cases, 31 deaths, and 197 have recovered so far. The rising death cases across the different countries has shown that the COVID-19 pandemic is no respect of person, of age, of status, of sex, religion, or social grouping. And if we look at the charts, it sends that signal that it gives one that goosebump that one need to be careful when one is looking at the coronavirus pandemic. The current update shows, if you look at the trend, a look at the global trend calls for serious concern in how we fight the virus. As at January 23rd, 2020, the world recorded 845 cases and 25 deaths. If you look at the Nigerian case today, we have actually recorded 981 cases and 31 deaths. So we are actually at the stage where the world was in January 23rd, which means that we are at the base level of this trend. We are at the base, we've not entered the curve. So this is frightful, because if we're at the base, it means that we're likely, that's the prayer we pray, because we're a praying country, we pray that we don't follow this trend, this spike, because if we're to follow this spike, it's going to be devastating for us in Nigeria. So we pray we don't follow this trend. So as at April, Nigeria has recorded 981 cases and 31 deaths. Nigeria appears to be at the beginning of the curve. The trend shows similar pattern following the world trend. Now, what exactly is the impact points? What are we feeling, especially when we look at the current state of our economy? The first shocker is on the oil price. So if you look at the last Nigeria entered into crisis January 31st, 20. Today, oil price has since fallen below $25 per barrel. Nigerian sweet crude is currently, Nigerian crude is currently trading at $12 per barrel. All of these are the direct impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. At $12 per barrel, it is even very difficult for the country to sell crude. The price that we are currently trading is lower than the production cost of crude at $22 per barrel, and also lower than the adjusted benchmark price of $30 per barrel. This sends a big signal to players in the Nigerian economy. The reason is that every time we have the oil price shock, the next bet is that you're going to devalue your currency. We've had the first round of currency adjustment, and we are likely, this is likely, if it persists, it is likely to lead us into another round of currency adjustment or devaluation. So oil price, like we know, is a major leading economic indicator for Nigeria. And we've seen this happen in the time past, that every time there's the oil cycle, Nigerian economy enters into a tailspin. The current trend does not look good for the country. By implication, COVID-19 has started triggering what we probably will see as a classic recession. Some school of thought are saying this is likely to create a depression. There's a difference between economic recession and economic depression. So the new reality calls for urgent development of the agricultural and agribusiness sector to boost the Nigerian export value. The challenge currently at hand is that even at the current low price of crude, Nigeria cannot find markets for her sweet crude. Nigeria again is caught in the web that is the famous Dutch disease. Every time there's this cycle, our economy enters into a tailspin. And the direct impact of low oil price is declining external reserves, high and rising unemployment, unsustainable debt, rising debt burden, and debt service payment. This also will show itself in the form of declining government revenue, and by implication, starving the states of allocation. So most states' government will not be able to pay salaries. The federal government will also struggle in paying salaries if this persists. So we can see the charts. If you look at the charts, the first one shows the sector's growth between 2015 and 2020. You can see exactly what happens when you divide the economy into three basic sectors: agriculture, industry, and the service sector. The agricultural sector is in bar charts, and what this shows us is that the agricultural sector did not enter into crisis all through the recession of 2015-2016. Agricultural sector sustained the Nigerian economy. But when you look at the spike from the industrial sector, you can see the volatility. And you look at the spike from the service sector, both sectors actually entered crisis mode and entered recession. But when you look at the new trend is the 2020. You can see that I did not forecast or predict what will happen, other than I put a recession there. The new trend, the question here is that, will the agricultural sector hit the recession button, given that all sectors faced recession during the 2015-2016 crisis? The agricultural sector has maintained a positive growth in the time past. However, this new COVID-19 pandemic is a new one, and it's surely going to affect the Nigerian agricultural business space. I will explain how it will affect us. Now, there's a feedback effect from all the activities happening in the economy. If you look at it, the hospitality industry is shut down, hotels are shut down, businesses are shut down, people are not buying as much as they are buying commodities, farmers that have produced cannot sell. January is usually the period where the cashew traders trade and store their cashew for exports. Most of the countries that are taking Nigerian exports have actually shut their borders and are also not producing. So it means that for the first time, Greek is likely to go into panic mode. So the question facing us today is how will COVID-19, how will it affect the agricultural sector? What is the current structure of the sector? So we need to understand the current structure of the agricultural sector in order to know how it will trickle down into the agricultural sector. By the way, when you look at the next slide shows us how Nigeria entered into crisis, how we came out of the crisis period, looking at the bar charts, the recovery period, and how we are likely to enter into another recession given the current crisis. IMF and World Bank have already projected that Nigeria is going to enter into another bout of recession. So what is the structure of the agricultural sector? The agricultural sector is structured into 4 sectors. Now these 4 sectors are the crop production, livestock, forestry, and fishery. Interestingly, the last report, that's the Q4 2019 GDP statistics, shows that 89% of our Greek GDP comes from one sector, which is crop production, whilst the remaining 11% is taken up by fishery, forestry, and livestock. Whilst livestock takes 6%, fishery takes 4%, forestry actually takes 1% of our Greek GDP. You can actually see the charts. When you look at the bar charts below, you see the production, 20.75%. If you look at the ratio, that's the ratio of agri sector contribution to GDP. So at the end of 2019, crop production took up 89% of our Greek share in GDP. Livestock, fishery, forestry took up 6%, 4%, and 1% respectively. Sadly, over 50% of what is produced at the crop production sector is lost annually to post-harvest losses. So if we look at the current structure of the agricultural sector, production is actually exposed to all kinds of issues. I'm going to leave us to ask some of our questions, some of the questions pertaining to crop production, livestock, forestry, and fishery. Then we look at the composition of the agribusiness sector. Agribusiness is a construct that extends beyond farming and includes operations in upstream, midstream, downstream sector of the agri-value chain. I'm going to explain this concept briefly. So it identifies with sets of activities that takes an agricultural product from farm to fork. That means from farm to the final consumer. Defining these sectors, we have the pre-upstream. Now, this is the sector that deals with research, seed management and control, standards and quality certification. The upstream, this is the beginning of the value chain, which means direct farming, direct cultivation, direct livestock production, direct forestry, direct fishery production. The midstream actually deals with processing, packaging, fabrication, designs, distribution, agro-journalism, etc. The downstream deals with shipping, logistics, export of value-added products, import of tools, equipment, preservatives, chemicals, and fertilizer. So you can see that the way the agricultural sector, the agribusiness sector is structured is that we have the pre-upstream, and basically at the pre-upstream level, that's where you have the research institutes, where they do all kinds of research. At the upstream sector, you have those that are going directly into farming. At the midstream sector, you have the middlemen that aggregates from the upstream and links directly to the downstream. The downstream sector is where you have the multinational operators trading within the midstream and the upstream sector. So majority of the active participants in agribusiness in Nigeria are actually playing at the upstream value chain. Interestingly, when you look at how agri has fared in Nigeria between 2018 and 2019, it simply tells us that the sector has been very resilient. Currently, the agricultural sector is the dominant sector in terms of contribution to GDP. The sector is the dominant sector in terms of contribution to GDP, followed by crop production. Then you have trade, you have crude petroleum and natural gas, you have telecommunication and information service, you have real estate, and you have construction. The fastest growing sector, however, agriculture falls within the list in terms of the fastest growing sector. What does this imply? When you say agri is one of the leading sectors in terms of contribution to GDP. However, one of the least sectors in terms of what? In terms of growth. It simply tells us that the sector requires a lot in order for active participants to come into this space. One of the things we share in class is that when you find 20 farmers, poultry farmers, going into the business at the beginning of the year, by the end of the second year, you're likely to find between 2 and 3 farmers left. All others would have fallen aside. That tells you how complex the agricultural sector is. So I'm going to leave us with, I'm going to take your question. Having given you the synopsis of the structure of the agricultural sector, I'll leave you to ask your questions so that I can take those questions. Thank you very much. So, over to you. Okay, I cannot hear you. I can't hear you.
All right, let me read some questions here.
Okay.
The first one I have here says, the uptake of agricultural insurance is reputed to be very low in Nigeria. What is your perspective of the role the insurance sector can play in stimulating AVC actors, especially in all the streams?
We have to look at 3
upstream.
questions. Okay, somebody is asking, most businesses in, okay, I want to look at 3. Hello?
Yes, go on. Hello.
Yeah, she's just gone off. I guess she's
Okay.
experiencing
Okay.
some internet challenge. But did you get the question I read out?
Can you read the question again?
All right. The uptake of agricultural insurance is reputed to be very low in Nigeria. What is your perspective of the role the insurance sector can play in stimulating AVC actors, especially in all the streams, that's the pre-upstream, upstream, midstream, and downstream?
Okay. So take another question.
All right. Most businesses in Nigeria are cabalized. I tried to process the timber in my farm into woods. We couldn't sell into the market due to cabal. How do we deal with this kind of issue? Then there's another question here. What real options are there for newbies within the agribusiness space, looking at the entire value chain?
Take that question again.
What real options are there for newbies within the agribusiness space, looking at the entire value chain?
Okay.
Will you answer all three, or do you want me to take more?
Take more.
Okay. Someone says, kindly suggest means of minimizing the post-harvest loss. Then another question, please advise which sector a lender, okay, so this is not too clear, but it says, please advise which sector a lender to distributors of finished produce to end users. Then I have another question here. Why should I invest now in agribusiness, given the current economic climate in Nigeria?
So let me start answering from the last question. Let me start with the last question. The last question says, why should I invest now, given the current situation, given the current COVID-19 pandemic? Now, it is interesting to note that agriculture, agribusiness, is actually not like producing any other product. When you choose to go into direct farming, you must understand that you are entering a seasonal cycle. Now, this seasonal cycle ranges between 3 months to 50 years. Did you get that? It ranges between 3 months to 50 years. So what I just said is that there are crops that you will plant today and you will get the proceeds in 3 months. You will harvest under 3 months. There are also crops that you will plant today and you will get your proceeds. You begin to get your proceeds after 50 years. So let me, on a lighter note, if I want to go into agriculture today, I am not going to go into agriculture because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to go into agriculture because of the future. I'm going to go into agriculture because it is the right thing to do. Without food, we are all dead. Agriculture is linked to food, to clothing, to housing, to medicine. If every one of us runs away from that sector, it will be difficult to provide solution to our health, to our housing need, to our food need, and to our medication. So if you are going to go into agriculture, be rest assured that you must first be an altruist. You must first think about man, that you're doing this not for yourself. You're doing it to further the cause of what? Man. I hope that question is clear. So you're not going into agriculture because you want to invest because of COVID-19. You're actually going into it because you have made a business case out of agriculture. You have actually done your feasibility study and discovered that there is something for you to do and happy in the agri space. So the second question that I would take here is the question that talked about cannibalism, or people cannibalizing, that there are so many in the industry. So take, for example, it is not only applicable to those in the wood value chain. Take the simple tomato in Benue. The tomato season comes up at a specific time in Benue, where you find tomato everywhere. Or the yam season, where you find yam everywhere in Zakibia. If you decide to bring in a trailer load of yam from Zakibia to Lagos, you will not sell that yam. The reason is that there's a way the market is structured and organized. Some of us would think that the market is unstructured, but the market is actually structured in that light. It is structured and organized. The active participants in this market, they know what they are doing. In order for you to play in this space, you must sit down and count your cost. You must join the committee of friends within this market space. You must go into the market, get your hands dirty, take notes of every nook and cranny in that market before you can actively participate in that market. Now, of late, what players are doing is that they bypass the market and they bypass those middlemen. And how are they doing this? You create a new market. So rather than take tomato to Mile 12 market, you create a new cluster. You come to the Bejuleki cluster, where you create a farm mat. And all players will begin to locate you and locate your farm mat with that tomato. Now, these market makers will not come and fight you when you create this kind of niche market. The second question is, what new business do we have within the agri-business value chain? This is a very broad question. When you look at the upstream, the midstream, the downstream, and the pre-upstream. The pre-upstream is not a sector that any starter can play because it involves research. So the pre-upstream is left for the likes of IITA. They are well funded, so you will not go there. The upstream is the sector that every one of us jump into. But interestingly, the people who jump into the upstream sector are people we will consider as very tired. You know, when they jump into this sector at retirement, they wait for their retirement benefit when they are clocking 55, 60. That's when they take their retirement money and push into a very complex sector. When you put your retirement money at the age of 60 in the upstream value space, you will lose the money. Because the upstream requires agility, the upstream requires speed, the upstream requires youthful energy, youthful burst of energy. At 60, you're tired. So how are you going to face it going into the farm, the hot sun at 60? So I think for you to see the opportunities in this sector, you need to come up first with a feasibility study. You need to look out for gaps. You need to look out for challenges that you want to solve. You need to find the problems within this space. I can give you an example. I can give you many examples of opportunities in this space. So when I look at the simple plantain and banana that we eat, we take plantain and we take plantain chips. So what we do in that space is plantain chips, dodo. When you fry it, it is now glucose, it is sugar. So you take plantain chips, you take dodo. But there's another part which we have neglected, the plantain noodles. None of us have researched into turning plantain into noodles. Remember that once you have the unripe plantain, it is iron, rich in iron, meaning that your competitors are not the Indomie noodle. When you come up with that product, you're actually coming up with a medicinal product that is good for those that have crossed the age of 50. But currently, it is not in our market because nobody is doing research. Nobody is coming up with new research or new findings. I believe I've answered that question. The other question, if I get it right, is, Ejiro, can you give me some other question? I think I've lost.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, every sessions I've attended alluded to the fact that 50% of agri-produce are lost at post-harvest. If this is a well-known fact, how come we are not getting solution to this known challenge?
So the answer to that question is very simple. People wake up from sleep, they wake up from their bed. At retirement, they just get up and say they are going into farming. The first thing they do is to go and buy land. Some, the first thing they do is to borrow money. They channel it into that space and they start producing. So let me give you a typical example. A typical example is the fish farmer who has not done his homework and he decides to go into fish farming. The first thing he's going to need is the high cost of his infrastructure. He's going to sink a borehole. He's going to sink different tanks, depending on the kind of tanks. It's either going to dig trenches where he's going to use the cemented tank, or he's going to use the plastic tank, or he's going to come up with the synthetic tank. Now, all of this costs money. Now, the cost of setting up is almost 20 times the real investment, your cost of fingerling and your cost of feed. So imagine that you've introduced 10,000 fingerlings and you're expected to do your first sales after the first 3 months. Now, these people just jump into this space without realizing that at harvest, you're going to get all the fishes coming up at the same time. At harvest, that's when you realize that there's no market. The major people buying your fish are people we call the scavengers, the women. They will come with their buckets and basins and they will underprice. They don't care your costs. They don't care how much you use in building your tank. All they care is that fish is this amount. But when you now move over to the market to see the woman that has bought your fish for such a ridiculous price, she's selling ×2 in the market. So what we see here is that people jump into this sector without doing their homework. I visited a farm where a tomato pepper farm, and this person jumped into this business without looking at the market. At harvest, the lady discovered that the cost of fueling her car from her farm to the market outweighs the profit that she's going to make at each day's sales. And what happened? She allowed the birds to feast on the pepper at the end of the day. So it borders on us counting our costs. It borders on us doing the feasibility study about what we are going into. You don't just wake up and jump into a sector that you list on the site. So maybe we'll take 2 more questions, then I continue.
Okay. Considering the reality of our environment, which stream do you consider the safest for a lending institution in the value chain?
I don't get that question.
Considering the reality of our environment, which stream do you consider the safest for a lending institution in the value chain?
So again, it depends. It depends on what you're looking at. I'll give you an example. You cannot borrow money. It is not right for you to take money from a bank, a financial institution at double digits to go into direct farming. The reason why it is not right is because farming, agriculture, is subject to the multiplier principle. So you need to start. It is also subject to experiential learning, meaning that you learn from somebody, you need to learn from somebody and you need to learn as you go. So you don't do trial and error with funds borrowed from the bank. So if you're going into large-scale production, you don't just go to the bank, collect money, and jump into. So let's give you an example. I started planting palm trees 2 years ago. I have planted over 1,000, currently I've planted 1,500 palms. And I'm estimating that I'm going to do between 5,000 and 6,000 palms in the next 5 years. Now, this palm that I'm planting, I am not going to get any proceed from it. Rather, I will keep spending money, clearing, tilling, maintaining the farm for the next 5 years. By the 5th year, the first set of proceeds that will come is not profits, because I'm going to plug it back into the investment. Now, this business is a business where you begin to get your returns between the 10th and the 11th year. Please, which bank will fund that kind of investment? This business that I just shared has a lifespan of between 45 and 50 years and can even last for the next 60 years. So when you start getting your return, it's a lifetime investment. So if I must go into a lifetime investment, I must be prepared to count my costs. So you don't borrow money at the stage of planting. You borrow money at the stage of processing. So for banks, do not just wake up and lend. You need to understand, am I going into long-term investment? If I am going to invest on a plantation, that's a long-term investment. If you find somebody who says he's going into timber, Iroko, mahogany, and a bank wants to fund that business, you're going to wait for 50 years. Because by the 10th year, the Iroko is still one shrub, one small tree. You will wait for 50 years. If I'm going into urban cultivation, I will need a bank that will fund me, that will give me funds, that will sustain me for 10 years. And not just give me fund and you make me pay back every year. So you don't throw fund into. Now for banks, it is easier to fund midstream than the downstream. The downstream deals with processing and export. So in my next set of slides, I'm going to share some of the things that Nigeria exports. One of the things we export, the number one thing we export today is not cocoa. It's not cocoa, it's not palm oil. Number one thing we export is sesame. A bank that is funding sesame export is going to make their money within that year's cycle. But a bank that is funding palm oil cultivation is not likely to see her money in the next 5-6 years. So it is for those lenders to understand with the upstream, downstream, midstream sector where they want to play. So 1-2 more questions before we continue. So one of the questions that I'm seeing here is that agribusiness is considered highly risky. It's difficult for business owners to be in control because the owner cannot control nature, markets, price, and even logistics. How can we deal with these situations? Very simple. Technology is now answering or creating solutions for some of this. If you look at the large-scale farms, they no longer wait for nature to tell them there's problem. They use drone. They use drone to see the entire farmland. They use drone to be able to manage and track events in the farmland. Again, you don't just need to go into farming without thinking of where you're going to sell. So my advice is, in order to play in this sector, your first port of call will be markets. So your research will be, where do I sell my product? So you don't start producing without thinking about the market. You don't start producing without understanding the entire flow of this business. So market makers are beginning to understand that you can actually beat some of these middlemen. For example, there are traders that are now selling online. There are farmers that are now linking their markets direct from their farmland. So it is no longer news that the market is evolving and the market is changing. So I also say this in class, that the closer you are to the upstream sector, the likelihood that you will fail. But the good news is that I'm playing in the upstream sector. Even though I say the closer you are, the likelihood you will fail. So it borders on understanding the sector that we are playing in. This other question says, do you think that there is a possibility that certain countries will increase their efforts to provide their people food security post-COVID? I think it's correct. You're actually correct, spot on here. Most countries are going to shut their borders. We are going to move away from globalization, and we are going to move into a period of protectionism. Trade protectionism means that I shut my borders against you in order to produce those things. Because in the first place, there's going to be apathy against the things that the Chinese are producing. A lot of countries will shun Chinese goods because of COVID-19. That's in the short term. In the long term, if you produce quality product, it will find its way into any markets in the world. So it's all about innovation and producing things that the country or the people need. Can I take one more? Is there anything I've not addressed? Okay, there's the insurance question. There's a question about the insurance sector. How can insurance leverage on insuring the agri space? Now, if you look at that data, it says 89% of active players in the agribusiness space are actually playing in the crop production sector. And the crop production segment is a violent and volatile segment of the agri-value chain. Now, the truth is that the financial service sector, the insurance body, they have not fully understood the dimension and the structure of the agricultural sector. So if I don't understand the sector, it will be difficult for me to fund or to insure that sector. Take, for example, the armyworm infestation of farms in the north 3 years ago. Most large-scale ginger farm lost everything. So which insurance company will come and protect and insure your farm? Or let's even take you back to NESRA, the Anchor Borrowers program. These programs are targeted at the pro-poor policies. They're targeted at the low-income earners. They are targeted at farmers, poor farmers. So for every poor farmer you give funds to, you're giving him money to do what? To farm on 1 hectare farmland or on a plot of land. Remember that I said initially that it is about yield per hectare and not yield per plot of land. So when you distribute funds to small scale farmers, you're going to get little aggregation from these small scale farmers. But when you channel the efforts, because we need only about 10% of our population to play in the upstream value chain. The poor farmers are supposed to play within the middle value chain where you have distribution, packaging, storage, and not play directly in farming, because these small scale farmers cannot buy tractors, cannot even weed their farms. They cannot buy chemicals. They cannot buy the things required. They cannot pay labor services. They use their children as labor, and they don't pay them for the services they render. So, and that is not the kind of agri or agribusiness that we're talking about. So I think I should go back to my slide. Let's see if there's any other one. Okay, I think I've touched on all of these questions. It is so strange how people talk about agribusiness without paying adequate attention to options of good quality. Thank you. So we don't pay attention to quality seeds. We don't pay attention to mechanization. We don't pay attention to soil tests. There are farmlands that people have obtained and they planted the crops and they planted it on a soil that will not do well with that crop. So we don't pay attention that there are certain basic rudiments that we must, if I'm going to do 1,000-hectare farmland, for crying out loud, I should test that land. I should come up with a report that will help me know whether the crop that I'm going to plant there will do well. So we also, so far I've been talking about crop. There's also the animal husbandry part. There's also, that's the livestock part. There's also the fishery part. And there's also the forestry part. The forestry part is one sector that none of us will want to invest in. Because if you put your money in timber, you're likely to grow old without reaping the reward from your effort. So that's one area where government has to play a significant role. So let me go back to my slide whilst you type your. So the next session will look at some of the effects, some of the things that we're going to see. So I'm going to pose a lot of questions, and I will take those questions as we continue. So agribusiness as the next best alternative. Is it actually the next best alternative? There are several reasons why Nigeria must quickly diversify the economy away from the current focus on oil and gas. You know that the word diversification, if you trace the Nigerian development from 1960 to date, there is no policy that has not mentioned diversification of the Nigerian economy. We have pumped a lot of money into the agricultural sector in a bid to diversify the economy, but nothing much has happened in terms of diversification of the economy. So there is need for us to move away from the oil and gas sector. Nigerian Bonny Light crude is currently trading below $12 per barrel. None of us envisaged this last year. None of us ever dreamt that oil price will crash to $12 per barrel. And even at that price, discounted price, Nigeria cannot sell her crude. Nigerian economy has remained a monoproduct economy, with the country earning over 90% of our revenue from crude oil. And this has been the narrative. Every government that has come on board has anchored on the oil and gas sector. So current fear of the global recession and shutdown of the productive activities could actually lead to food insecurity. We've started seeing this, especially during this shutdown. We've actually started seeing out not laying your cash, but we're laying the food. So if you're bringing yam, I saw a video where they pounce on a vehicle bringing in yam. So we are seeing a new dynamic that people are hungry. And when people are hungry, they go the extra length to get food, not money. So the current fear is that we are likely to run into food insecurity. How will this happen? You know that we are currently, that agric is a seasonal thing, that you have the planting season, you have the cultivation season, and you have the harvest season. Now, January, February, March is usually the beginning of farming in certain part of Nigeria. However, for this year, we have not seen the rains. The rain just started coming down in the month towards the late part of April, which means that production is going to slow down. Now, if the rains are not coming quickly and they shut down across, most of the state governments are saying that they are going to shut down interstate movement. If they shut down interstate movements, you're going to find a scenario where by the month of May, you're not going to find maize. And if you don't find maize, you create another kind of cycle for the feed millers. The feed millers who will now be left with importation of maize. And no feed miller with the current exchange rate dynamics can actually import maize. So there's a vicious cycle spinning around. If farmers cannot go to farm because of the coronavirus pandemic, it means there's going to be a gap, a cyclical gap. This cyclical gap will stop people from going to farm. And when they don't go to farm, during harvest, we probably will not find harvest. And that would be a worst case scenario. So Nigeria cannot afford to wait for us not to have food. Because the poor in the midst of the rich will actually swallow on the rich. So we've seen it that it has been muted that a global recession is in the offing, is in the air. And with this shutdown, productivity has actually what? Slowed down across different climes. So it takes us to if we look at this chart, you will see how precarious our agricultural sector is. So these are the top 10 exports, current top 10 exports from Nigeria. So what you find is that if you look at the percentage total, the share of total exports, sector share of total exports, the ones that I colored are the ones that are directly linked to agriculture. So you have cigarettes, tobacco, you have urea, which is a kind of protein gotten from animals. Then you have goods fermented, cocoa. Then you have sesame seed. Of all of this, sesame happens to be number one. But when you look down, you will see that petroleum oil alone takes about 76.08% of the share of our total exports. It means what we export is crude. And what we import is what? Refined products. So if you look at these dynamics, it is telling us that there is no oil palm here, there is no rubber here, there is no hide and skin here, there is no cocoa here, there's cocoa, there is no groundnut here. So it tells us that the structure of the Nigerian agricultural sector has evolved and changed over time. In the 60s and 70s, we had regional distribution of commodities. When you go to the Middle Belt, you go to the eastern part of Nigeria, the southern part of Nigeria, the western part of Nigeria. The west was known for cocoa. The south was known, that's the Middle Belt, that's the Edo Delta, was known for rubber, whilst the north was known for cotton groundnuts. All of these are fizzled out. And what we are left with is what you are seeing today. And the interesting part of this narrative is that the active players in these sectors are not Nigerians. The active players, if you look at sesame oil, sesame seed, you're going to see the likes of West African cotton as the largest sesame seed plant in Africa, in Ikeja. Not many of us will know that plant is in Ikeja. And so when you see sesame appearing here, they probably will link it to multinational firms that are into sesame cultivation. So please take your questions down, because this part of the session is going to be more of interactive, where I will take your questions and I'll answer your questions. So when you look at our import value, you look at what Nigeria is currently importing, you will see that most of the things we're importing are things that this country would have actually started producing. And on top of it, you're going to see other electrodiagnostics. You see motor spirit, which is the refined petroleum product. So you see again the kind of things we import. If you look at the disaggregated imports, you will see that Nigeria actually imported palm oil. Nigeria imported palm oil in 2019. We imported palm oil from Malaysia, from Indonesia, and from India. So Nigeria today is known for crops such as sesame, cocoa, other frozen shrimps. So this is the agric. So when you look at major traded agric products, so for those of us going into this sector, you probably will see the most active. And the most active here is sesame, good fermented Nigerian cocoa, other frozen shrimps and prawns. So if you ask, where are they producing prawns and shrimps? Where are they producing this? These again are multinational firms. Multinational firms along a coastal waterway. You need salt water to do prawns and not fresh water. So these are multinational firms in Nigeria actually producing these things. So sesame oil and fraction, cashew nuts, shelled. Now, the direct impact of COVID-19 on these things that you're seeing is that those who are into cashew export are actually in trouble today because borders have been shut. Vietnam, which is the largest country taking a cashew nuts, have actually shut their borders because of the COVID-19 impact. So countries that will ordinarily take our products have closed their borders, meaning that a lot of farmers will be left with the proceeds for this year. And some have actually borrowed from I know a farmer that has borrowed huge funds to go into the cashew cycle. I also know a farmer that went into fund crowding in order to fund his cocoa venture. But all of these people will be hit badly by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but Nigeria, beyond sesame oil, beyond cashew, beyond frozen shrimps, Nigeria has a capacity to do more things. Nigeria has a potential to produce cassava and cassava starch. You need to look at this cassava value chain. What we are currently doing in the cassava value chain is that 80% of what we produce in the cassava value chain is gari and fufu. And when you do gari and fufu, you lose track of your ethanol. You lose track of your industrial starch. Because in order to produce your fufu and gari, you just have to waste your ethanol. You have to waste your starch. The process of fermenting it means you will throw those things away. And that's what we've been doing. So Nigeria has a capacity to produce industrial starch. Now, who requires your industrial starch? Your medicine, your capsules. They are all carbohydrate based. So the pharmaceutical company requires your industrial starch. The petrochemical companies requires your industrial starch. The oil and gas sector requires your industrial starch. Those in the paper industry requires your industrial starch. For glue, it is the best form of what? Of glue, when you make glue from industrial starch. So Nigeria is basically playing in the part where you just eat the gari. So we also have the palm oil. Nigeria has a capacity to do more than Indonesia and Malaysia. However, Indonesia and Malaysia are currently doing 90% of world palm oil output, while Nigeria is doing about 700,000 metric tons. Indonesia and Malaysia put together are almost doing about 45 million metric tons every year. We have the coconut oil, which can actually be exported. We have the plantain flour, which I talked about earlier. We have the cotton, hides and skin. The pomade that we eat is actually leather for shoes and belts. but we trade and we eat it here in Nigeria. So you also have the synthetic and rubber latex, which is still in high demand. But Nigeria has moved away from all of this because people are not seeing the value in all of this. So in 1960, 1970, Nigeria was known for export crops such as cocoa, cotton, rubber, hides and skin, timber, mahogany, groundnut, and oil palm. Nigeria lost its regional strength in this cash crop due to the discovery of and concentration on crude oil. In Q4 2019, Nigeria imported palm oil from Malaysia, Singapore, and India. If we examine, so an examination of some of the value chain will tell the story of Nigeria. So let us begin by looking at tomato. We know that Nigeria has a capacity to produce tomato. Nigeria also has a capacity to produce the tomato that will feed the 200 million Nigerians. Nigeria's current annual production capacity, according to FAO stats, is 3.9 million metric tons. That's what we do. This, when compared with China, India, US production capacity, is 61.6, 19.3, and 12.3 million metric tons. The question is, if I am producing 3.9 million metric tons, and there's a country that is doing 61.6 metric tons, can I compete with this country? Will the goods produced from that country not find its way into my country? So all this shows the existence of what? A gap in the production of what? Tomato in Nigeria. Every year we lose over 50% of tomato produce to post-harvest losses and lack of processing capacity. It goes beyond processing capacity. We probably will begin to look at infrastructure. We'll begin to look at power. We'll begin to look at storage capacity, because you need a cooling, you need a cooling system in order to preserve your tomato. So if there's no power, if there's no good road, if there's no means of preserving your tomato, we'll resort to doing what? So farmers today have resorted to drying the tomato. So when you go to mile 12, at a certain point in time, you see dry tomato. So farmers have become innovative in drying those tomatoes and keeping them to the next harvest time. So why do we import tomato puree? So this government has done a lot in terms of, especially the central bank, in banning the tomato puree production. We once had a company that was importing tomato puree. All they do is they bring in tomato puree into the country and they process, they just can and take to the market at the expense of farmers who are producing tomato. So why does this problem exist in the first place with a population of over 200 million people? Why do we have this kind of waste? Why are all of this happening to us? Now, the answer lies in when we look at the yield per hectare. When we look at the yield per hectare and when we look at the production capacity of each of these countries. So if we take the first one, you look at the yield per hectare for US, the yield per hectare for China, the yield per hectare for Nigeria. So you're looking at 6.44 against 96.8 tons per hectare. So what this implies is that no matter how much you struggle, you cannot compete. I will flood your market. If I can bring in tomato puree and I can bring in tomato sauce from US, I will actually flood your Nigerian market. If I can smuggle it in, I will flood your market with tomato puree. And why is our yield so low? Now, the interesting part of it is that if you look at Nigeria against China, what you find is that we all started at almost the same time. We all began, if you look at US, India, Nigeria, China, you will see that Nigeria and India actually started at par in 1961. But whilst the Indians were going up, Nigeria actually was flattened, they came down. So which tells us that we have a problem. So how do we solve the issue of this yield per hectare? So it involves mechanization. The next one we're going to look at is rice cultivation. Nigeria's current annual rice paddy production is 9.8 million tons per annum. Compare this with Indian and China production capacity of 168.5 million tons and 214.4 million tons. So you see these countries producing 214 and 168.5 million tons. They will actually flow these things into Benin. And from Benin, people will smuggle them into your country. So what this tells us is that we have put our money in a sector that we are not competitive. So if your yield is lower than that of these countries, you will not do well. But however, there are farmers today that are getting better yield in Nigeria. So it boils down on science, it boils down on technology, it boils down on mechanization, it boils down on the quality of the seed, it boils down on the quality, the geographical location in which you are planting rice. Are you within the rice belt? There's a belt they call the rice belt. Are you within the zone where you can cultivate rice? There's a zone they call the cassava belt. There's a zone they call the oil palm belt. Are you within those belts? If you're not within those belts and you're taking a crop to those belts, you're likely to fail. So Nigeria has 84 million hectares of arable land, of which only 40% is under cultivation. So if you're driving through from Lagos to those states, and you look to your right and to your left, what you see is land that is not cultivated. What you see is land that they've chopped down all the trees, they've taken all the wood, and they've left the land bare. So Nigeria as a country has a capacity to feed herself. Nigeria as a country has a capacity to produce those things that they trade with other countries in their raw states. They have capacity to process them and sell to other countries. So the current yield of rice is very low, 2.2 metric tons per hectare. However, there are farmers that are now getting between 5 and 6 metric tons per hectare because of best practice in the sector. So when you compare this to 4.2 metric tons and 7.6 metric tons per hectare for India and China, it tells you on 1 hectare farmland, the Chinese will do almost 4 times what you are currently doing. So what are the new challenges in the sector? The Central Bank of Nigeria, in response to COVID-19 pandemic, announced a combined stimulus package of about 3.5 trillion targeted at household, businesses, manufacturers, and healthcare providers. Some of us will ask, how can we access this 3.5 trillion? Forgetting that there's the Central Bank has the Anchor Borrowers Program, there's also the MISRA, there's also intervention, there's also grant coming from non countries to Nigeria. All of these funds are chasing agriculture and agribusiness space. The question is, how will all of this impact the sector? What impact will this have on the economy? Is the private sector ready for the new challenge of opening up the agricultural sector? To show you how unprepared we are, so I will take you through one of the charts that I use in class, how unprepared we are. So what you are seeing is a typical forest product value chain. Now, this is the pulp tree. The origin of this chart is that at the center of all of these activities is the pulp tree. Now, the pulp tree is the tree that we use to make what? Paper. So when you look at all the papers that we use today, it comes from the pulp tree. So at the center, we have the pulp tree. So if you ask, is Nigeria competitive? Does Nigeria's soil Is Nigeria's soil adaptable to the production of the poultry? Remember, we once had Iwopi paper mill. So at the center of this value chain is the poultry. But however, the poultry is dark, it's colored dark. It is colored dark because it is not existing currently. It is not there. So all the papers, all the notebooks, all the textbooks, all that we require are actually imported. We import all of these things. In fact, we import cheap paper back from India. So, and if you import all of these things, now look at the industry that we have lost. Take, for example, the cork. If you can see the cork in my slide. This is a country where we pop champagne. So when you open the champagne, that cork that follows you actually comes from the sawmill industry, from sawdust. And you ask yourself, what do we do with our sawdust? We use our sawdust for irrigation. We dump them. We do nothing with them. So when you look at your prefab wood that you use for your ceiling, it actually comes from the sawdust and sawmill. So when you look at it, today Nigeria imports the prefab wood. So you look at building materials, we look at other products, we look at wood furniture, prefabricated houses, down to sanitary towels and sanitary products. They're all from the poultry. Down to your tissue paper, down to the paper making chemicals, consulting industries. Now all of this, the forest fire prevention, logging, harvesting machineries, the chainsaw blade, we do not produce these things. We import them. The paper board and the cardboard are all from this sector. Today, Nigeria is known for importing virtually everything. So you're looking at the printer. We do not have the technology to do any of these things. So this tells us the kind of opportunities we have as a country that we're not leveraging on. Time will not permit me to delve into if I delve into the poultry value chain, we begin to see the dimension of the poultry value chain, the things that we do not see. When you hear a farmer say, I'm going into poultry, all that they'll tell you is that they are going into poultry because they want to aggregate eggs, or they are going into poultry because they want to raise their own chick, they want to raise broilers. But it goes beyond that. So it takes us to, like I said, the second part is I want you to be more interactive. I want us to take the questions. What are the new opportunities in this sector? So I want you to ask those questions, ask me questions so that I can take it up, so that it can be interactive, so that I will not just be the only one talking. What are the new opportunities in the sector? What has changed? Has anything truly changed? Question, question, question.
Okay, thank you very much for your insightful discussion on this program. Please, somebody is asking, how has digitalization impacted agribusiness?
Very simple. The post-COVID-19 era is going to be an era that is driven by digitization. Companies that are ready and positioned, those players that are ready and positioned, that are actually trading now. There are farmers that are trading now, and they're not trading, they're not moving their wares and goods from the farm to the market. The active play, imagine that you're entering into a production cycle. The likes of Hollands have actually bought up everything because they've done their tests, they've done their scenario analysis, they've given you seed, they give you, the aggregators have come to you, they've shown you how to plant it, they know your yield per hectare, they know what they're expecting at the end of the year. So these companies will now be the ones to come and offtake your products. There's a company that is into cassava starch production. They are everywhere looking for cassava to buy. They are not waiting for, they don't want to go into the farm to get cassava because it is farm also looking for cassava that way. But then, those that are actively in social media, those that are actively integrating or interfacing with digital platform are now trading. Because once you're visible, and if I throw into the media space that I have snails to sell today, a lot of people ask me to supply. Or sometimes I'll tell them to come and pick it up. So I do not need to go out. So the market is actually changing. And digitization will be one of the things that will define this space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's another question. Since most new entrants into the agribusiness sector fall on the wayside after 2 years, isn't it time that agribusiness consultants and agribusiness incubation are recognized?
That question is very easy to answer. We started running the agribusiness program 6 years ago. We've been building a network of real participants in the sector. These active participants are now beginning to make noise. And one of the things we say in class is that a time will come when the real farmers will begin to fly first class and business class. It has already started. In one of my classes, they were able to register, that class went to Rwanda. They went to Rwanda and they went to another African country where they were able to register businesses in those countries. And one of the participants in that class was actually able to patent a Rwandan coffee in Nigeria. So big things are beginning to happen in this sector. Do not sit back and believe that farming is going to continuously be the way it is done in the past. We are beginning to have traction in this sector. We are beginning to have number. We are beginning to have sizable number that are making critical noise in the space. And not just noise, they are actually productive and doing well in the sector.
Thank you. We have a number of questions asking how this program is being run in ABS. Okay, it's a 5-day program. It's a 15-day program run over 5 months. So it's a 5-day program, 5 days held every 2 months. That is like in Lagos now, we have March, May, and July. And Abuja, we have July, September, and November. That's how it is. And it is a week every 2 months, 9 to 5. The next one coming up now is 6 July to 20 November, Abuja, 10th August to 10th December in Lagos. And we are planning to run one in Port Harcourt. It's still in the pipeline. We also have an upcoming online agribusiness course. The date to be communicated to you very soon. Thank you very much.
I want to share, before you say that, I want to share that the Lagos Agribusiness Program is an impact course. Why I say it's an impact course is that it sits on a tripod. The program sits on a tripod. So the first thing we look at is critical thinking and understanding the agri-value chain. Most people go into what they don't know. So we try to unbundle the myth of, oh, now I know what I am entering. So we have critical thinking and understanding the agri-value chain. The next bet after critical thinking and understanding the agri-value chain is that we'll take you out to the field where you begin to see some of the things that have been taught in class. So when we come back to the next module, we look at entrepreneurial mindsets. And here we believe you are now an entrepreneur. So one of the questions that I raised there is that CBN is throwing funds. Donor countries are bringing funds to Nigeria, but most of the players currently in the sector cannot access this fund. And the reason is because they do not have a business structure. So one of the things we try to do is solve that business structure problem, whereby you You have a system. You run your business like a business. So what we say is that the buzzword here is that agribusiness is business, must be run professionally, and it is profitable. The last one is operational excellence. So we make participants see that whatever it is I am going to produce must be such that it is of a high quality, can meet all the standards, and can pass through the international corridors. So whatever I am producing, I must make sure I get all the certifications. So we expose participants to knowing all of these things before they venture into the space. So we've had quite a lot of success stories of people who attended our program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will answer all the remaining questions.
Are there new questions concerning?
We'll answer all the remaining questions via the email. The time is quite fast spent. We have a virtual open day on 14th May, where you can ask more questions on the Agribusiness Management Program. We hope your expectations have been met on this webinar. Kindly send us more questions and your concerns will be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.